Welcome to Stream of Conscience, brought to you by Democracy for America, Fairfield County, where we believe that change is possible and you can make it happen. I'm your host, John Hartwell. Our guests today are Nancy Alderman and Doug Wood. Nancy is president of Environment and Human Health Incorporated, an organization based in New Haven dedicated to protecting human health from environmental harm through education, research, and the promotion of sound public policy. Nancy's been a frequent guest on this show, reporting on efforts to move environmental legislation through the General Assembly in Hartford, and she returns today to talk about the need for a new effort to protect legislation already in place that forbids the use of pesticides on K-8 school playing fields in Connecticut. Nancy, welcome back to Stream of Conscience.
Thank you.
Doug Wood is Associate Director of the GRASSROOTS Environmental Education, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating the public about the links between common environmental exposures and human health. GRASSROOTS is a recipient of the EPA's Environmental Quality Award for innovative programs. Doug makes documentary films and public service radio campaigns on environmental issues and children's health, and he recently created the website and political action campaign A Million Fracking Letters, where New Yorkers are urged to write letters to Governor Andrew Cuomo to oppose hydrofracking in their state. Doug, welcome to Stream of Conscience.
Thanks, John. Nice to be here.
So, Nancy, we have today a pesticide ban on K-8 schools.
Right.
And it's for the playing fields.
Right.
Came into place in 2010.
Right.
How did that actually happen? How did we get to this point in Connecticut?
Well, actually, there were very many groups that were working to reduce exposures to children, especially our smallest children, which K-8 is, but to reduce their pesticide exposures. And one way to do that was to have the fields that they play on in their schools become organic and not use lawn care pesticides. And so that appealed to very many environmental groups, but it also appealed to parents and PTAs. And there was a large coalition, and it did get passed. It took a number of years, but it did get passed. People really bought into it, not only the legislators, but also parents and people who really understand that pesticides are risky. They are designed to kill living things, and that our smallest children in their schools, at least on their playing fields, should be protected. Now, as we look back, it seems it was easier to pass the law than it is to keep the law in place.
Hold on to it, yeah.
Right.
And I'd like to point out that this was actually done when Governor Rell was in place. So
Yes.
It was a Republican governor who signed this legislation.
Yes, but there was a tremendous amount of pressure to do it.
Yes.
And she, too, is a mother.
Yes. So now we have a situation where the ban has come into place in 2010. So we're 2 years now into this, and we're beginning to get pushback.
It never occurred to us when the bill was passed that people would try to undo the bill. I mean, that's fairly unusual that a legislature in any state passes a law that then is worked so hard to undo that law. And so it was actually sort of a surprise last year when there was such a push to do it. And not only was there a push to do it, it was introduced in the Planning and Development Committee, and it passed out of that committee. That was even more of a surprise. So it looked like, my goodness, it has traction.
Yeah.
Traction. How did this happen? They did it in a very clever way. Very clever.
And we know that behind this effort is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, CCM, which represents over 140 of the towns and cities in the state belong to this organization. And they recently sent out a letter to their constituent groups saying, we want to undo this because there are lots of problems. And Doug, you actually wrote a letter back in response to that. Can you briefly outline what was in their letter? And we'll talk later about your response. But what are they saying?
Sure. The reason I responded to their letter is because their letter picked out our organization as one that was secretly trying to sell stuff.
Right.
And that was the letter took the position that we were presenting half-truths and other not believable information in an effort to make a profit. And so I had no choice but to respond. I want to go back to something you said earlier, though, when you said that the primary mover behind this is the Connecticut groups, Connecticut towns. I think what's really behind this is the pesticide manufacturers.
Yes.
This is an issue of protecting children or protecting products. Now, and you can frame this up, you can dress this up however you want, but that's really what it comes down to, is that the pesticide industry is interested in protecting their market share, protecting their products, protecting their profits. And then, and that's really what's driving this. I think CCM is responding to some of its members who say, gee, now that I don't have my pesticides anymore, my fields look terrible.
Right, and CCM has put together a coalition, at least on this letter, which is a pretty strong one, Connecticut Association of Athletic Directors. So athletic directors, obviously the people in schools who are most concerned with the state of the playing fields. The Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, school business officials, Connecticut Association of Schools. I mean, there's a long list of people that they've rounded up that seemingly are opposed to the legislation as it stands now and want to see it undone.
I'd like to add a little bit. CCM is meant to represent all the towns. We have 169 towns in Connecticut. And they are meant to represent all those towns, which means that every mayor or first selectman is a member of this group. And they represent them when they speak. What is sort of astounding about this, although they are probably representing the park people and the people that have to do the fields in the towns, my feeling is that the mayors and first selectmen do not really know what they're doing. And to me, this is fairly serious. So I have talked to a number of first selectmen and mayors. They knew nothing about this issue.
Right.
So if you are sort of an organization that represents these people, it would seem to me that they should at least apprise those members of what they're doing. On top of it, it is, I'm sure, the pesticide industry which has such a vested interest. But to be perfectly blunt, it is harder to do organic turf for anybody who has an organic home, as we do. It's easier to spray. It's just easier.
Yeah.
You don't do anything. You just spray. But that's dangerous. It's dangerous to dogs. It's dangerous to children. And what's really interesting, too, is smaller children, young children, don't detoxify as well as adults. There are reasons to protect our smallest children. Beside the fact that pesticides are designed to kill living things, our smallest children don't detoxify them as well. So, so it's important to put a little more effort in.
Right.
But I think that we do have to admit, yes, it does take a little more effort, but that lots of things in life take a little more effort. But we do them if we want to protect the health and safety of an enormous group of people. And children, K through 8, cannot protect themselves. They are forced to go to school. They need to be safe in these schools.
Absolutely. So, Doug, you did a little slideshow that responded, I think, to many of the points that were in the CCM memo. And I'd like to run that slideshow now and then come back and talk about the main points.
Sure.
Doug, that's really a great slideshow, and I'd really like to walk through with you the major points that you made in that. And
Sure.
the first major point was that before 1960, very little pesticides were being used. Most school fields were, in fact, organic.
Sure. Yeah, in fact, most sports fields at that time were organic. You know, pesticides were invented during World War II. And after the war, the pesticide industry found itself with a product and not a big market. So they went after the agricultural market and you know, convinced farmers that they had to use pesticides. And then in the 50s, they started to go after other markets, and golf courses was one. You know,
Yes.
they certainly went after the golf courses, and then it was consumers and schools. You know, before that, I think turf managers understood a little more about soil biology than turf managers may today. They understood that nature has put in place everything you need to grow grass if you know how to do it. And don't forget, you know, everybody from Babe Ruth to, you know, Ted Williams, Johnny Unitas, the great athletes of the world played on organic turf and set their records on organic turf. And there's no history of, you know, guys getting hurt because the turf was organic. I mean, it's just kind of a silly argument.
So you actually, in the video, make the claim that natural fields are better.
Well, you know, John, I've walked on these fields. I've been on these fields. You know, they're soft under your feet. They're lush. They're full. They're beautiful. And I'm talking about fields in Cheshire, in Brantford, in places like Marblehead, Massachusetts, and Scarsdale, New York, and East Meadow down on Long Island. So it belies the myth that you can't do it. Obviously, you can do it. Some people know how to do it. As Nancy said, we're not saying, you know, it may not be as easy as bag 1, bag 2, bag 3. But it's not impossible either. And I think the opponents of this legislation like to make it sound as though, A, it's so expensive that nobody can possibly do it, and B, it doesn't work anyway. And neither of those things are true. If it was impossible to do, then you wouldn't be able to find a field. I dare anybody to go to Cheshire and walk on their soccer field and tell me it can't be done.
I've done it. They're fabulous.
It's just phenomenal.
It's really interesting because you've got Brantford, for example, which is right outside New Haven, has had organic fields, I think, for 25 years. Is that right?
I don't
Not
know.
that long.
Not that long.
For a while. At least.
Okay, for a while.
Certainly been 5 or 6 years.
But apparently Guilford and Madison, which are right next door, are part of this coalition to undo the legislation and go back to using pesticides.
You know, I think there was a tendency among it was a bitter fight, this pesticide ban and I think a lot of people, I think the school boards had the feeling of, don't tell us what to do.
Well, yes,
and I understand that.
That's always the case.
And then there were the people who said, don't give us an unfunded mandate, and I certainly understand that. Money's tight, nobody wants to have an unfunded mandate. But neither of those things happen to be true, and I think there's some people laboring under some false assumptions here, which is why I made the trade show. I mean, why I made the slideshow. But, you know, I think there were some people who just decided to let the fields go to try to prove to the legislators that they were wrong. Oh, look what happened. You passed this law, our fields fell apart. You know, I think that's, you know, it's a little irresponsible to take that position, frankly. We're talking about children's health, and nobody wants kids to get hurt, and I think it's certainly possible to maintain the fields and make them look great without using pesticides.
So in the slide, so you also say that over time it costs less to do organic.
Well, this has been one of the big arguments, and so yeah, we did some research with using statistics from the industry, from the Sports Turf Association, and also looking at real life examples of schools that were doing organic. And what we saw is organic started out costing more and then went down. The cost of an organic turf program always goes down. The cost of a chemical program always goes up. Where they cross depends on a lot of factors, but certainly we can make that case. And recently, the advances that they've done in terms of sprayable nutrition, compost tea, and other things, you know, we're reducing costs to pennies per field for nutrition, which is, you know, unbelievable. The problem with pennies per field is obviously nobody's making a big profit.
Right.
So, you know, that's an issue for some people.
Now, Nancy, you addressed the pesticides are dangerous piece of the slideshow, and it seems to me pretty obvious on the face of it that something that has the word "side" in it, pesticide, homicide, it's there to kill things. How could they not be dangerous? And why are people out there saying, "Oh, they're EPA registered, therefore they're okay"?
Well, the first thing I'd like to do is define pesticide.
Okay.
Because no matter how many groups I talk to that are very knowledgeable, I'm always amazed that people don't actually know the definition of pesticide. They think that pesticide means insecticide. And pesticide, for turf anyway, is insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides. And they all do different things. They have different methods of killing. However, they are all designed to kill living things. That's probably the most important thing for people to understand, because to learn how every pesticide does its work is really much too vast for people to fully understand.
You can't expect a parent or a parent-to-teacher association or even
to get it.
I mean, to understand the science here is really difficult stuff.
However, the insecticides as a whole sort of do their damage by harming the neurosystem,
right,
the brain,
yes,
and the brain of insects. But also, when children are exposed, it also puts them at risk for neurotoxins. And the herbicides actually change the growth pattern of the weeds. And so they function in a different way that also affect children. So herbicides are also dangerous. Some of them are carcinogenic. The other problem, when it's EPA approved, EPA tests pesticides one at a time. And they test them at a certain amount and say it's safe if you, or it seems to be safe if you don't use more than this amount. The problem is that we don't use pesticides one at a time on fields. For instance, the herbicides that they really like to use, which kill the weeds, they really don't like dandelions. And when you use herbicides, you're using three. You're using 2,4-D, dicamba, and MCPP. No one has any idea how they interact. So people are pretty savvy about drugs and how they interact. And when you use painkillers, you shouldn't drink or whatever. We don't have any clue what it means to spray weed and feed on a field with 3 pest herbicides in them. And so they're dangerous.
And the carcinogenic factor here is something that won't necessarily be seen for 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, you could be planting the seed in children for cancers, and those develop later on. When they're well past the stage of being in those schools, you wouldn't be able to necessarily tie it
You
back.
could never track them.
Yeah.
But on top of that, many of these fields have small children on them that the parents who are pregnant come to watch these children. We know now that some of the most serious exposures are to pregnant women and to the fetus. And so how do you sort that out? How do you have a 3rd grade parent who is pregnant with that child's sibling protected from sitting on the fields watching the 3rd grader? So there's so many areas here that need protection that I really think that the people doing the fields should just say, okay, I'm willing to do a little bit extra work.
Right.
This is worth it. And so whatever reasons they throw out for wanting to use pesticides, I maintain the biggest reason is ease of their job.
Yeah.
I think, John, I want to pick up, I think you raise an excellent point about the latency period of some of the diseases we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about, in the case of cancer, obviously, it can be 10, 15 years before you see a cancer develop. In the case of endocrine disruption, which is what the synthetic pyrethroid pesticides are thought to do, you know, the endocrine system of a developing child is a very, very delicate balance of chemicals.
Yes.
And it doesn't take much to alter that balance in a way that can prevent normal development. Now, how are you going to see that, and how will you track that? Can you be certain that a child that has difficulty reading in 11th grade is having that difficulty because of an exposure that came on a playing field on November 2? You'll never be able to make that connection.
We'll never
but
know.
we know enough about how these pesticides affect children that I think we owe it to them to be careful. As far as the EPA is concerned, I want to also mention the reason these things are
registered
with the EPA is not because they're safe, it's because they're dangerous.
Yes.
That's the whole point.
Right.
If they weren't toxic to humans, then the EPA wouldn't get involved. And the EPA, uses data from the manufacturers. EPA doesn't have its own labs. There's no funding for EPA to do its own testing, so they're relying on data submitted by the manufacturers. And the manufacturers say, "Here's the best data we have to show X, Y, Z."
They may not be showing the worst data they have.
Well, that has happened. We've known that that's happened in the past,
Right.
where manufacturers have not.
Also, there is far more testing on the pesticides, insecticides and herbicides and fungicides that go on food than go on turf. So if you are using a pesticide on the turf, on the ground, that is not used on food, that pesticide does not have to meet the same standards as the pesticides that are used on food. And I think that most people probably, aren't fully aware of that.
So let's move to what we need to do. And your organization is out there offering services to people, to other organizations, to help them bridge the gap. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, the first thing we did was we offered free turf training, natural turf training. It was a full day course.
Right.
We even provided lunch, so we took away every excuse not to attend.
And who was that offered?
This was offered to every school district in Connecticut and every parks department in Connecticut.
Okay.
We would let as long as you were affiliated with one of those groups, you could come. We had a couple of hundred people show up. We didn't get everybody. We were missing, we missed a lot of school districts who just didn't show. And believe me, we tried. We called, we sent letters, we did all that kind of stuff. But when somebody doesn't want to learn, you can't make somebody learn.
Right.
So what we're doing now is we've got a consortium, if you will, a group of like-minded people we've put together. Nancy is one of our star members, and we've got like-minded people across Connecticut, and the group is called the Connecticut Safe Grounds Coalition. The website is ctsafegrounds.org.
Safe grounds,
grounds as in
the ground, right?
As in the ground.
As school grounds is what we're going for. Yes.
And what we're doing is trying to work with groups like CCM and anybody else that's interested, to work with them to find a solution for them. We're all about finding a good answer. The answer for us can't be, let's keep putting the poisons on the school ground. That's kind of off the table, but everything else is up. How can we help you? You want a training class? Do you need somebody to come to your school and help you? We have some resources at our disposal, and we're happy to help people understand the issue. We also, of course, want to make sure that legislators are fully aware of what really is hanging in the balance here.
And which committee did this go through last year?
Yeah, it went through planning and development, but I think
not through the environmental
well,
committee?
it eventually has to go to environment, but they knew enough to start with planning and development.
Okay.
But I also want to say how they did it, because it was so clever. They didn't just put a bill in that would just undo what had been done. They couched it in integrated pest management.
Right, IPM.
IPM.
Yes.
And integrated pest management does work. It really means that you only use pesticides when you have to, that you try to do other means first. And then if you can't, you use pesticides and then only the less toxic.
Right.
So IPM certainly works in certain areas. It works in some nursery settings because it reduces their prices, their costs, and so they like that. It also can work inside schools. But it doesn't work on fields. And the reason it doesn't work on fields is because unless the grounds people really want to do it, and we know now that they don't really want to do it,
right,
they're going to use, it does allow pesticides. So what we have learned from other states is that if you mandate IPM on the grounds, you will get pesticides as usual. But legislators, I don't think, were fully aware of that, and they thought, well, IPM makes some sense, and it'll allow them to use pesticides when they really have to. And so it came out of planning and development.
So, I'm sorry, we're
Yeah.
almost out of time
Okay.
here. So, what is it that someone should do who's watching this show? What one thing or two things can they do immediately to help?
I can do it fast. One is we need PTAs desperately. So anybody who's watching this who is a parent and has a child in a school needs to get their PTA behind trying to keep this in place.
And where do they get the information that they would take to their PTA?
Where they get it from from their state PTA. We've already given it to them.
Okay.
Okay. Environment and Human Health has already visited the Connecticut State PTA.
But they can go to your website as well.
They can definitely do that.
Can they go to also?
They can go to CT Safe
All right.
Grounds.
So there's several places that they can go, and obviously we're
Okay. And the other thing that really needs to happen is that anybody watching this who cares about the issue and is not a member of a PTA, they really need to find out who is the state legislator, who is their state senator, and they need to get them involved, because state legislators and state senators only listen to their constituents.
Yeah.
So if I call somebody in Greenwich, where I don't live, they don't care what I have to say.
Right.
They want to hear from their own people.
Yeah.
And that's why Connecticut needs to work on this legislatively. We need Connecticut folks to get their people involved.
So the two steps are organize in the PTA level in your schools, so you can turn around the school board, so you can turn around the school administration on this issue.
Right.
And secondly, work with your state rep and your state senator to make sure that nothing gets through in Hartford that
Exactly.
that
Yeah,
goes the wrong way.
thank your legislator for doing the right thing. That's
Right.
the approach we take. You
Yes.
know, legislators are used to hearing from people complaining about stuff. Here's an opportunity to call your legislator and say, you know, that thing you did, we really appreciate it and we think it's great.
Right.
And the more people they hear from who are positive about this legislation, the less likely it is it'll be
Good
overturned.
advice.
Well,
Good advice.
Doug and Nancy, thank you so much for coming today and for this show. You know, it's really important work that you're doing, and you know, any way we can help, please let us know.
Well, this is huge.
Yeah,
Getting the word out is
exactly
tremendous.
what we need. Thank you.
Thanks again for coming.
You're welcome.
That's our show for this week. We hope you enjoyed it. You can find all our shows on YouTube by going to youtube/user/DFATVnet. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. Or you can send comments or suggestions for a show to info@dfa-tv.net. If you'd like to learn more about progressive political action, we meet at 7 p.m. on the first Wednesday of the month at the Silver Star Diner in Norwalk. We'd love to have you join us. Remember, change is possible, and you can make it happen. This has been Stream of Conscience, and I'm your host, John Hartwell. Thanks for watching.